Okay. Okay, so Peter, maybe I'll start out like this. A long-term athletic development is over the last, 10 years in the United States has become a very hot topic with coaches in the coaching sciences. Um, Maybe not so much before, but now and more it is being discussed. This is something that in the former Soviet sports schools has been around a long time and discussed and planned and talked about and systemized. You care to discuss that a little bit? First of all, on long-term athletic development, maybe a history in uh, the Soviet Union, and a little bit of maybe concepts for wrestlers.
Yes. So at the moment, American development model is the concept and guidelines for most American NGBs, for most American national governing bodies under the United States Olympic Committee. American development model started in America, in the US, by USA Hockey, and they were put in charge by United States Olympic Committee to implement it for all other sports under the umbrella of USOC and Paralympic Committee. So basic guidelines of how much to train at which age, how much to compete at which age, how much to travel at each age, basic requirements for gradual progression from fun and play through, train to compete, and then staying competitive for as long as you can, and then healthy for life. So that's the concept. It's pretty abbreviated at the moment. And wrestling is also, of course, part of this American development model. They developed their guidelines. It came from a long-term athlete development guidelines that were developed by, that were created by Istvan Bali from Hungary for Canada, for Canadian, for most Canadian sports under their Olympic umbrella, and then in UK, in South Africa, in English-speaking countries, that's how it happened. I'm going back in history. I'm coming from most recent. So American development model came from long-term athlete development model developed for, created for Western English-speaking countries by Hungarian, who took it from Eastern European very comprehensive guidelines for each sport that have been developed after World War II, primarily in the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries. Hungary is very good at it as well, in East Germany and many other countries. It has a very long history prior to the socialist and communist regimes in these countries. Austro-Hungarian system and Czechoslovakian system of sport that had highly developed training routines and infrastructures many decades before World War II. So in Russia, Russian Empire had this in place again decades and decades before the Soviet Union. So it is in the European culture for more than a century. For more than a century, it has been part of Eastern European culture, which includes Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and some of Germany, Russia. Now it came from the East. It came from Korea and Japan and that's where the best guidelines, sport-specific guidelines that wrestling can use are still located. If you look at
does that come from martial arts development systems in the East?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you look at Taekwondo, for example, Taekwondo clubs in America, they still very well serve as exemplars, as best practices.
Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You progress, and you have to have a basic level of knowledge before you progress to the next level.
Yeah, you go through more than 10 belts or 10 levels.
And technical proficiency and the skill set and the knowledge and the understanding as well as the physical.
Absolutely.
And questions. So
this is awesome.
Like,
and that's where we still go back. That's still, and it still should be our
wow. I did not know that, Peter. That's unbelievable. So you're telling me that the Eastern Bloc countries stole that concept, or that's where they originated the ideas from Japan and Korea and their martial arts systems of development. That is unbelievable.
But it's so logical if you think about it.
Yeah, but I never thought of that.
Yeah, if you look at if you look at yoga and Tai Chi and ancient schools of combat, they are more than 2,000 years old, right?
Yeah. No, and as a martial artist, I totally get it, because growing up, you'd have to have the technical and physical proficiencies. You had to demonstrate, you had to have the knowledge, you had to get tested, and you had to move through the steps. I never connected the pieces. This is the first time anyone's ever said anything like this.
And the most important, I'd say, practice that's not implemented yet in most sports, was attempted in the Soviet in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union to be formalized, is your progression through levels or belts that require very specific fitness.
So the fitness levels, you have to physically demonstrate these capabilities.
Yeah, and I would argue that in wrestling and in North America, as in many other sports, competition play a dominant role and unhealthy role in the development and qualification,
because it became all about the competition versus developing the animal, the systems to be able to compete at a high level.
Absolutely.
Focusing on the well-rounded development to compete at a high level versus just competition.
Yeah, in North American Taekwondo clubs, you can go through most of your belts up to black belt and never compete at a tournament. You can do all your development within a club and do sparring with your club partners. But what is critical and much more important for your development and lifelong fitness and lifelong health, and perhaps what we see now is that your teenage performance does not predict your performance in your 20s and 30s when you have a peak, right? What's more important for that optimization of that peak is your gradual progression in your strength, endurance, flexibility, and coordination. And these are the tests that you must pass as part of Taekwondo clubs in North America to progress to the black level belt. And then some clubs even beyond black belt level, you can just do. You must pass your fitness tests, some knowledge test, which is also unique. Knowledge tests and the tests of Pumsei, or in karate they called kato, right?
Yeah.
Katos. or in Taekwondo it's Pomsei. So your competitive sparring, your actual bout, is only a small part of your progression as an athlete. Your long-term athlete development is based most importantly on your fitness level, coordination. Okay, so that's the key most important practice that is still fringe. Paradoxically, it is still fringe.
Yeah, it is fringe. It is fringe where you think about the well-rounded development of the athlete versus just strictly the competition. We need to get them competing. And I see this in all sports in the United States with coaches. It's all about the competition. And yeah, I this is again, it's a complete shift in mindset. Now, one of the things that I just want to make a little addendum to this when you're talking about martial arts and I'm talking about wrestling. Wrestling is one of the oldest combat sports or the oldest combat sport in the world, but never developed a systemized approach like other martial arts. And when you look at mixed martial arts right now, that's very popular. You look at the greatest champions throughout history of MMA, and they're ex-wrestlers. I would say the majority of the ones who have become champions are ex-wrestlers, yet they have not ever come up that I'm aware of with a system where, like other martial arts, you say, this is, you're now a yellow belt, then an orange belt, then a green belt, which could easily be done where the athlete demonstrates those skills and knowledge, where you develop them like a martial art. And I know people have discussed this. I've had discussions with different wrestling coaches that like that idea, but I'm not aware of anyone that's systematically and and systemizing it like this with the long-term athletic development that you're speaking of.
So in our book,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in Fringe Methodologies, at the end we have tables.
Absolutely.
That translated from the Russian Sport Ministry's recommendations for fitness levels and fitness tests of all ages, starting from six years old, and the last 12th stage is 70 plus, right? So you can see what you can do at stage 11. Sorry, stage 11. 70 plus years old.
70 years old plus.
Yeah. So
it never stops. I mean, it starts from 6 and goes to 70 plus. The long-term athletic development plan of an athlete, and Peter, as far as I am aware, this is the first time Peter went through and translated these documents into English. This has never been done before, correct? Where you have a extensive.
Well, some attempted to translate it, but it was this. You see, this system is called a GTO, Ready for Labor and Defense Fitness Program. It has been evolving since 1930s. It was created
fitness.
Yeah, before World War II.
As an athlete.
And translations have been made through the process, and some of the translations I saw were from 1980s, but only recently.
This is current.
Yeah, only recently the early age groups, 6 to 8 year old, for example, and 70 plus year old have been added to the program. Only recently it became lifelong fitness program. Initially it was for the youth, and that is what most of the tests and fitness programs that we found are comprehensive and kind of similar to this. that we investigated with you in our article that's published in Journal of Sport.
So just to explain it a little bit, in a little more detail, it's guidelines to develop up to an elite athlete of what you should be able to do for speed, endurance, conditioning, pretty much to be a well-rounded athlete, mobility, basically a little bit of everything as you're moving through at ages that you can test to see how, if you're reaching the upper standards of an athlete, and multiple tests.
Yeah. So when I was competing, I had a little kind of athlete passport where all my results have been indicated. In order for me to compete in any tournament, I had to have a doctor's permission, but also I had to pass these fitness tests,
So
GTO
you have
fitness
the
tests.
physical ability to go into a tournament. So meaning it's like, should you even be here?
Yeah.
I mean, are your fitness levels up to par to be able to compete at this level? And so it wasn't just anyone can just show up and go. You have to prove with your passport that you're actually at the standards required to compete at that level.
Yeah, and my coach had to make sure that he would enter me into a competition only after I pass the test at high level. So there are 3 levels in our book. We indicate 3 levels of testing. And again, like you said, it's endurance. It's either run or walk or swim. You have choice of activities. Then push-ups, pull-ups, crunches, sit-ups to indicate your strength. Toe touches and other flexibility drills to indicate your flexibility levels. And coordination, some coordination things that you have to pass. So these are the key most important areas. So you must be able to have a certain level of endurance, strength, and flexibility and coordination in order to compete. That is what can be better for preventing injuries and helping coaches to ensure that the athlete is ready, that the athlete has the cardiovascular system that's ready, musculoskeletal system that's ready, that you're not going to pull your joints, you're not going to damage your heart. These are the most important things that you have to ensure as a coach. And this is the most fundamental requirement for the long-term successful progression in the sport, that you constantly are screening yourself against the given norms. You are actually told at this age you must be able to run 1 mile for this time. You could be at level, at bronze, silver, or gold level, but you must be somewhere in a minimum at the bronze level. So it gives you a corridor of minimum and maximum times for the running distance, minimum and maximum number of pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups.
Minimum. So in order to get your passport to compete, you have to physically be capable of competing, which I mean, it's like getting your USA Wrestling card, but no standards. And if like USA Wrestling were to go, you can't get your card. If you're this age, you must show this. You must demonstrate this. When you're this age, you must demonstrate this. And it brings a whole nother level to, what you're doing. And I just think that's a great idea. It gives people something to shoot for as well. Like, okay, I'm learning the sport tactically and technically, and I'm getting a skill set, but I also have to make sure that my fitness levels are on par with at least the minimum standard to be able to compete.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a question of being more instructive, more detailed, and more prescriptive in your requirements for kids to compete. As we know, in many countries, and you say Scandinavian countries are extreme about it, you can't even compete before you're 13 years old or so. And if you do so, you know your clubs will be closed. Okay, and that was not the case in Eastern Europe, but pretty much the coaches received this as these guidelines as instructions, and you know question of following it. Well, you know, yes, you can it can sometimes it was taken as a guidance. I don't think it was that. You know, it's debatable. Let's put it this way: it's debatable how you reinforce it. But the most important thing that was done to ensure it was rewarding, not punishing for not doing this, but rewarding, giving some badges, giving recognition, giving public recognition, and giving some bonus points at school for complying with this, and giving some bonus points. Right now, this system is revived in Russia, and when you enter university, if you have high level of GTO, and you're given some
That's the fitness test.
yeah, some bonus points as the same as then progressing to sport specific.
Wow, that's opening up another can of worms. If you get some type of a rebate or whatever for college based on you coming to college physically fit at a high level for your health, some type of something is given to you, something to shoot for. I think that's, I mean, if state funded universities, because obviously we have an obesity problem and general health problem in the United States, if there was some type of a reduction, just slightly, like on your tuition based on passing, being more physically healthy, I think that would just help people to get into habits and maybe, you know, make kids more motivated that don't even play sports. But I got a couple questions, Peter, that I know Kyle does too. So obviously Russia is very high level wrestling. The United States and Russia are both wonderful histories in the sport. And thinking about competition, because I know this is something that coaches, you know, we tend to start competing at a very young age in the United States. How about the Russian wrestlers? Do they start young, or is there a recommendation of years of training prior to competition? What is the what's the standard procedure or the thought process with Russian wrestlers?
Historically, science-based advice and the policy, national policy, since the Soviet Union times, you don't start with any sports that are compressing sports. Weightlifting and wrestling are good examples. You don't start before 12, 13 years old in terms of serious training, not competition, no competitions, but also no serious training. You cannot put serious weights, and you cannot put you cannot lift
They don't want to compress the spine and the joints with the young athletes by lifting and causing
lifting each other. Even lifting each other is too much before this age, according to the doctors, according to scientists, and that's how well it is kind of followed is yes. So not always. And there are also Eastern republics which have very
Yeah, like all the stands, the Eastern republics, you're saying?
which have very long history of wrestling, where wrestling is the most important national sport. And historically, if you look at the Russian wrestlers, a lot of them come from these republics, and people from all over the world go to these republics of Dagestan, republics,
Yeah.
areas that end with stan.
Yeah, that's what I said,
Um,
yeah.
Dagestan.
A lot of high performance coaches and athletes go there to try to find out what are their training methods and restoration methods and so forth. And of course, they do start at early age. They do have traditions of little kids wrestling at as early as, but they also have very long historical experience with fitness. They have great respect, and they have
They want to develop them physically to be able to handle the loading, to what their body is going to have to go through. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So to just to get the big picture from these fitness tests that go as a background behind long-term athlete development, we then have sport-specific norms and results that are like belts in Eastern combats, and developed a very similar system of 10.
Have a belt system for the,
Yeah,
so you're saying for the wrestling, it's like a belt system for the
Yeah,
combatives.
If you look at Russian wrestling, in our book we have actually detailed translation of the boxing levels. What you have is three junior levels, junior 3, 2, 1, then adult levels 3, 2, 1, then candidate to master, and then master of sport. So here you have 10 levels of and then you have after master of sport you have international level master of sport and merited master of sport. These are elite. Master of sport is basically when you start competing internationally, and that's your
So
top
12 levels total.
Yeah.
12.
But initially everybody goes very similarly as you go through belt level in Taekwondo. You go through the belt levels as a junior, 3 belt levels as a junior, 3 belt level as more of an teenager, usually teenager and adult. Well, teenager usually, but it's adult level. It's called adult levels. Anybody can go through them, but basically you cannot jump into a very high level competition before going through these levels. That's your gradual, seamless, and healthy progression from your first steps in wrestling competition and boxing competition. It's done for 130 sports at the moment, and a group of scientists, group of coaches, they sit down and they spend a lot of time. It's not subjective opinion. It is worked out by experts and by actual competition results. What are the requirements for
practice, the best practice
level, for junior level 3, 2, 1, for adult level 3, 2, 1, and then for masters. Again, for boxing, for wrestling, it's mostly requirements are to win at certain level, but at a level that is not too high, a level that is just above you. So in other words, if you are going for, say, level 1 before you go to master level, you must win someone who is a candidate to master of sport, right? So you have to beat in a bout. You have to have a bout, and you have to win a certain number of those who have
one
first-
level above. You need to be able to beat someone in that level before you move into that level.
yes.
Wow, a perfect guideline. If you deserve to be in that level, you should be able to beat someone in that level. Otherwise, you stay where you're at. Wow. Now, Peter, when is I mean, so you start out, let's say, even in the Eastern, the stands, the Eastern countries, even at a young age, when would they compete? Like the first competitions, do they just train for a while? And then there's they kind of recommend this is when you compete. So maybe they start training early, but then they're not competing, or they are competing when they start training early.
Again, particularly with sports like wrestling or weightlifting and boxing, you do not start before certain age at all. That was done by, in this age was determined by Western science in the Soviet Union by the science that we're used to, traditional science and medicine. Medical scientists who we here in the West understand based on the child development. What you're asking is, at which age did
the youngest ones in wrestling, when do they start? Even if they're going to start them a little younger, do they not compete like those Eastern countries? Do they just train and practice for maybe a few years and then they go to compete? The ones that are maybe not following the strict guidelines that are in Russia, but are they not competing and training, or do they how early do they get children actually competing is my question.
I think they do train, play, they break out, they do a lot of elements. They start competing only at their as a play without victories announced, without highlighting, without highlighting, and most importantly, without rewarding any victories, without rewarding any
wow, this is unique.
Any fierce competition, so that there is no stress, and there is and then step by step competing within the club at very low level kind of competitions that are more fun play games rather than competitions for a prize.
So the idea of all of this, and this is the topic, is long-term athletic development, not the athlete having their peak performances when they're 16 years old, 17 years old. The purpose of all this is so that they don't burn out, their stress levels aren't so much at young ages, but then they learn to handle the stresses and hit their peak when they're in their 20s and early 20s to early 30s. This is the objective.
Yes. And now recently in past 5-10 years, we have scientific experiments done and published the evidence that there is no indication of your future success in the peak age. There is no indication of it when you are 13 years old. When you are 13, 15 years old and you are winning that tournament, there are
zero indication that you're going to be an elite athlete in your 20s and early 30s.
Some indication, but your chances are probably as high as someone who is somewhere in the middle, because we know because we know how you develop. It just, the only thing it means that you accelerated, you developed as a child and as a growing teenager. You accelerated your development. You developed a bit quicker in this couple of years prior to this competition.
It means really nothing.
Grew.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just grew faster than others. But in the following 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're gonna slow down, and those who are now not as successful are gonna bypass you, and they can be very well more successful than you are. What is more indicative is your fundamental physical abilities and psychological abilities. Your something that's more measured through the tests of fitness and psychological strength tests. These are more important indications of your future success than your competitions.
This is outstanding, because this is, and these are things that we've discussed before, Peter, in on the long-term athletic development. But I really like the way we're using the example of wrestling, because it kind of makes things a little bit clearer, because I'm thinking about a young wrestler developing, and obviously we know that Russia and the former Soviet states have great history of wrestling, and it puts things into a different perspective, thinking about these little steps, these, but they're not little, they're big in theory, and how these concepts you take on trying to reduce the stress. And gradually, it's gradualism. It's what we discussed before, gradualism. And you gradually increase the stress as they move on. But the play, the fun, enjoying it, the fact that you're not emphasizing, that somebody won and somebody lost, but maybe, what they're learning and how they're developing, and rewarding the technique and rewarding the knowledge that they're gaining, so that they're learning, and then later you increase gradually, and then it's just, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and what we're still to capitalize on in terms of long-term athlete development guidelines, detailed guidelines that we discussed, is retention. We talk a lot about retention. We talk a lot about retaining athletes, retaining wrestlers, retaining students. This is the fundamental mechanism for retaining, not burning them physically and not burning them psychologically, burning them down quickly by entering them into competitions when they're not 101% ready for it, is
psychologically and physiologically.
You're losing a lot of athletes because they start too early, because they start too early with too much stress. Following more systematic guidelines for fitness development, for sport-specific development, will ensure that more kids will stay for longer, and more athletes will compete for many more years, extending their career. So it's, again, retention of your athletes at early stages and mid stages, helping them not to burn down and not to drop out, not to get too stressed physically, psychologically, not to drop out. But then what you're doing by incorporating this gradual steps of progression is you are creating healthier athlete, and you are therefore making their competitive career longer. You're getting them into a habit of everyday conditioning, every bloody day, hours of conditioning every bloody day. They're getting used to the boring workouts that you must use to, if you want to be successful for life, if you want to have
That's a great point.
if you don't want to end your career earlier than your body can allow you to.
Yeah, because the greatest athletes can master boredom. They're the greatest athletes, but how do you learn that? It's a gradual approach from a young age on, because it needs to be done over and over and over and over and over and over. And the idea is, if you do that at too young of an age, they burn out. So you have to, it's a slow roast. It's like a crock pot versus in a microwave. You have a slow roast, and slowly you cook, and it tastes much better. That's the idea, long-term athletic development. So